Welcome back to the panel discussion, Maximizing ROI Through Data Center Transformation, sponsored by Nutanix on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. My guests today, Darren Ash, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Chris Howard of Nutanix, Brigadier General Kevin Nally of the Marine Corps, and Fred Whiteside of the Labor Department. And gentlemen, let's kind of take a retrospective to the benefit of your colleagues who are going through the same thing. Darren, I want to start with you. If we were starting over today and you were taking the very first step on this path, but you have the benefit of the knowledge you've amassed and what you've learned from your colleagues as you've gone through this, are there things that you would do differently? Are there things you would do in a different order? Are there things that you would not do at all? What essentially are the lessons that you've learned throughout this process, Darren?
Great question. I think this is going to be a mix of things that I'm proud that we did and things we could have improved upon. First one is ensure that we have a dedicated project manager through the whole project. The individual can focus on it. The second one is something that we did include, and I would encourage anybody going down this path to include as well, which gets back to the early engagement with the space and facilities people. And I would include real estate as well. The reason I bring up that for a couple reasons. One is this is tied to the concept of freeze the footprint, another administration priority. Again, we've got a lot of data centers out there. They occupy space. There's an interest, obviously, to reduce the amount of real estate that we've got. Again, another key point. Another point for facilities and space, energy consumption. You need to establish the baseline. You know, at some point, somebody's going to ask, what are you saving? That's, you know, at the end of when everything's implemented, we can be assured that we've got an energy efficient and type of environment, but did we have the metrics, did we have the data to demonstrate what we saved and how we're doing? So having that in place to the best of our ability is incredibly important, but their involvement will help ensure that those types of issues are being addressed, not just in the planning, but also in the execution. The final one that I'd mention or reference is early on, think about the platform, the single approach that you want to take. Again, it gets back to the concept of standardization. We talked earlier in the panel about avoiding the forklift. Okay, so if we're not going to do the forklift, what are we trying to strive for? Which then leads to the final point, which is ensuring that whatever that end state is, and the end state is really a transitory type of end state, are you boxing yourself into a corner? And really making sure that whatever you're planning from a technical perspective ensures you've got the means to transition to, whether it's a cloud, private, et cetera, a different type of environment. You don't want to box yourself in.
You mentioned the metrics, and the metrics I think are important because when I talk about metrics on anything, not just data center transformation, the issue always seems to be, are the metrics important so you can demonstrate what happened or because you didn't know what happened before? And I guess that's my question here is do you believe establishing the metrics are important because you want to compare before and after, or because in some cases you didn't know what you had before and you want to make sure that you at least know what you had after?
I think it's both. I mean, we're always going to be asking, think about the Government Accountability Office. They're going to come in and ask, what was the end result? And they'll come in and do an audit, or the Inspector General, rightfully should, to assess how we did. Were there any things that we could have done differently? But irrespective of GAO or the IG, it is important for us to know what we've got. Again, it gets back to some of the earlier points of doing the assessment, understanding the applications you've got, the information sensitivity, the number of servers, the number of, all the different things that you need to know. You need to establish that baseline, but you can't spend oodles of years doing that. At some point, you need to move on. You need to execute. But you need that both to understand what you've got and how you did.
Fred Whiteside of the Labor Department, lessons learned, do differently, not do different order, all of that?
Yeah, first of all, at one point, Darren makes an excellent point. I think also, if you would end up with as many methodologies for calculating those savings and identifying those deltas as you do agencies. You have to have a standard methodology for really capturing that. And OMB they're working towards it. And I think it's been a bit of an exercise in patience for some of us because we're asked to report these things, but we no real solid or clear methodology for doing so. But they're moving towards it, and I think that's important. Everybody has to use the same method, first of all. But more to the point of the question, we have had an opportunity to, like I mentioned earlier, step back and look at the entire enterprise and make some really important decisions. We are in the process of redeveloping our enterprise architecture at the same time. We're developing a target architecture at the same time that we're moving forward with consolidation and migration to cloud computing. So, you know, this is a lot of activity all at one time. And I think that in a perfect world, you would have loved to have had an opportunity to take some time to plan. But I don't think that's realistic. You know, at some point, you absolutely do have to go ahead and pull the trigger and move forward. And it's working. But I think that was probably the most difficult thing. Because I think you learn a lot about yourselves as an organization when you take on a task like this. And it's nice to be able to really take those lessons learned and plan around them, but it's just really difficult to do that on the fly, so to speak. And I think that would probably be the biggest difficulty and the biggest thing that I would probably change. Yeah.
General Nally, how about you? Lessons learned, things that you would do differently, advice for your colleagues that are undergoing these transformations?
Again, being in the military, we're a little bit different, so I really don't have anything that I would do differently. I'd say I got some great people that work with me, and the credit goes to them. And for example, when we decided to collapse 5 of our unclassified networks into one over the course of a couple of years, and that's part of the Joint Information Environment effort, the JIE environment. I had great engineers that came in and they put this chart up the length of my conference room, and then they put one on top. They said the bottom one is as is, the top one's to be. And just if you weren't even from an IT background, you look at the top one and you go, wow, there's less IT, there's less boundaries, so it's more secure, less labor, et cetera. And you just go, wow, that's the plan. But my biggest challenge is I have Marines that they come work with me for 3 years, and then they get orders to go to Okinawa or California, and then you get somebody new in, and it takes them a while to get spun up on the plan, and then they're gone. And that's my biggest challenge, is retaining people. But it's good for them to move on and move about, though. But that's my challenge.
Chris, one of the things that Darren and Fred both talked about was transformations of other types simultaneous to their data center transformations. Fred talked about an enterprise architecture redesign at the same time they did theirs. Darren talked about a physical move to planning to move to a different location. Is that an opportunity, or is that a potential hurdle? Now, they've both done theirs successfully, but I wonder if it might be an advantage or a detriment to add other moving parts to the same time you're doing a data center transformation.
I think we discussed this earlier. I think that, you know, there's a lot of different activities that happen simultaneously, and all of them are just as important as the IT or data center consolidation. Picking the right location to be as efficient or green as possible, that's extremely important. Eliminating applications or duplication of efforts at the same time you're transforming, that's important. How many data centers you move from? If you have 100, do you go to 10 or 5 or 4? So all of these decisions have to be made in tandem. None of them can be siloed approach. You can't make one decision based on, well, let's move everything from 10 data centers to 1, but then you don't think about, well, how are we getting those applications from point A to point B? How many of those applications do we really need? You know, how are we going to pay the bill for the cooling and power and green IT and those types of things? So I think you have to take all of them into account. I mean, it can be overwhelming. There's no question about it, but you have to have the right people with the right focus. They have to have buy-in to what you're trying to accomplish. So there's a lot of moving parts, and it's not easy, obviously. These guys have all done it. I've been a part of it, but I've not been responsible for doing it, and I can't imagine the overwhelming responsibility that comes with that. So it's not easy. There's one customer in particular that one that I've worked with that has hundreds of data centers, and one of the leaders of that organization stood up and said, well, I've got good news and bad news. Good news is we closed 49 data centers. Bad news is we didn't save one penny. So there wasn't a lot of thought put into how to do that, not only from the application and where the locations are moving to. Is it forklift? Is it just a data migration? So without taking all of those things into consideration, it may just be, a worthless adventure from a cost perspective. So
is that then the lesson learned that you would try to convey most adamantly to somebody who's starting down this path, is the strategy that each of our panelists has talked about today and the importance of that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's got to be more to just saying, okay, that location can be shut down, just move it from here to here. Does that really accomplish anything? So I think the overall plan and strategy and all the different things that you need to take into consideration from an IT, facilities, power, cooling, you have to have a good plan. And without a good plan, it's just going to be a move from, one bad place to another. There's no improvements. There's no streamlining or efficiencies in that.
And that's where we'll wrap up. Darren, I'll ask each of you to give me some thoughts about strategy planning. If you were sitting down with a colleague of yours having a cup of coffee, what would you tell that person over the coffee, Darren, in a minute or so about what they should do strategically to get ready for this kind of transformation?
Strategic is not thinking of data center transformation solely unto itself. As Chris was saying, it really is tied intrinsically with a whole bunch of other things, whether it's cloud, freeze the footprint, virtualization. There's a whole bunch of different things that we have to take into consideration and plan for that and think it through.
General Nally, strategic advice?
Have a vision, strategy, plan of action, milestones, figure out where you're going to get the resources from, start to execute and get senior leadership buy-in.
Fred Whiteside, Labor Department, your strategy advice for your colleagues who are about to go down this path?
I would imagine you'd be better served looking at the enterprise and developing that target, developing a target architecture, and understanding where it is that you want to be, and using these consolidation, cloud, virtualization is all tools to get you to a particular place. And I think if you think about it from that approach, I don't think you can go wrong.
Gentlemen, I want to thank all of you for participating in our conversation today. Darren Ash of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Chris Howard of Nutanix, Brigadier General Kevin Nally of the Marine Corps, Fred Whiteside of the Department of Labor. Thank you all for being here. You've been listening to our panel discussion, Maximizing ROI Through Data Center Transformation, sponsored by Nutanix on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.
On behalf of Nutanix and our media host, thanks to Francis Rose and the panel for this informative discussion. You'll be presented with some polling questions as you leave the webinar to help us improve future sessions. We appreciate your feedback. We'll have the archive from this session available shortly, and a link will be sent to you for you to share with your colleagues. Those of you who requested a training certificate for this webinar should receive it in the next 2 weeks. Be sure to register for upcoming webinars from WTOP, Federal News Radio, and Fed Insider. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you.